What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my Week 16 top 30 running back rankings. If you guys are watching this video, I'm assuming you have advanced to the next round. Maybe you had a first round bye. Congratulations. Hopefully, I can help you guys set your best lineups here for Week 16. If you guys enjoy the video, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and subscribe. But let's just dive right into the rankings here. And starting off in Tier 1, definitely a ton of quality options. We're going to start off with my running back 1 here, Bijan Robinson going up against the Giants. This is a really nice matchup here. The Giants are allowing the 5th most points per game to the running back position. The Falcons are going to be significant favorites. And in Bijan's last 9 games, he's averaging 21.5 points per game. So Bijan's been balling out. It's a great matchup. Should be a favorable game script. Bijan Robinson, just a super strong play. Then my running back 2 is going to be Jahmyr Gibbs going up against the Bears. And this David Montgomery injury could really open up Jahmyr Gibbs to just be a complete league winner. I don't think they're going to give him every single touch, but I do think he is going to see a much larger workload. And we saw last year, there were 3 games without David Montgomery. In those matchups, Jahmyr Gibbs averaged 132 yards per game. So he's going to have a couple of big performances here to close out the season, and hopefully he can bring home your fantasy football championship. Then we have Chase Brown, another dude who's just looking like a complete league winner. He has had 6 games with no Zach Moss. In those games, he is averaging 23 PPR points per game. So he has been an auto lock in your lineup. You continue to fire him up as a very, very strong option. Then my running back 4, Saquon Barkley. No disrespect to Saquon. He is the running back 1 on the season. All these guys are great options here in Tier 1. Then I have Josh Jacobs going up against the Saints. It's a nice matchup. They are top 10 in points per game allowed to the running back position. Josh Jacobs has put up 20-plus points in his last 4 games. And in those 4 games, he has put up 8 touchdowns. So someone who really struggled to get into the end zone early on in the season is really just scoring at will over his last few games. And then my last guy in Tier 1, James Conner going up against the Panthers. A fantastic matchup. They are allowing the most points per game to the running back position. He's coming off of back-to-back big performances. Week 14, 22.2 points. Week 15, 30.8. I think he makes that 3 straight here going up against his Panthers defense. Now, pivoting into Tier 2, going to start off with Derrick Henry going up against the Steelers. And it's kind of weird having Derrick Henry here down in Tier 2, someone who had such an amazing start to the season, but he has actually scored under 15 PPR points in 5 straight games. Kind of shocking that they put up as many points as they did against the Giants, and he didn't have a huge fantasy day. On paper, it's not the best matchup against the Steelers, but the Ravens are still top 5 in implied points. They're going to run up the scoreboard here. Should be a favorable game script. I think Derrick Henry can still have a nice close to the season. Then my running back 8 is going to be Zach Charbonnet. Not a good matchup here. The Vikings are allowing the 3rd fewest points per game to the running back position. And that actually reminds me, there are a couple of running backs I'm assuming are not playing this week. Obviously, David Montgomery, already confirmed to be out. Alvin Kamara, I don't think he's going to play with his groin, but still remains to be seen, but he won't be in these rankings. And then Kenneth Walker, I'm just going to be assuming he misses another one here. It's definitely possible he does return, in which case I think we'd probably be looking at pretty close to a 50-50 split in a not great matchup, which isn't super exciting for either guy. But if Kenneth Walker can't play, I think we continue to fire up Zach Charbonnet as a very strong workhorse. Then I'm going to go with Devon Achane going up against the 49ers. Continues to be solid with 2 at quarterback, 21.7 points per game. The issue is just the rushing efficiency. Like, he's just not getting a ton of production on the ground. He's pretty much like a wide receiver who's just getting like force-fed, inefficient touches on the ground. He is under 4 yards per carry in each of his last 4 games. So I still think he's a nice top 10 play, but it would just be nice if he could get some consistency going on the ground. And then my last running back in this tier, James Cook going up against the Patriots. They are top 7 in points per game allowed to running backs. James Cook has scored 19-plus points in 3 of his last 4, so had a really nice bounce back from a tough Week 14 game. Now let's pivot into Tier 3. And we're going to start off with Kyren Williams going up against the Jets. Kyren continues to have a monster workload. It just hasn't led to like that top tier fantasy production. He has 29 carries in back-to-back games. The problem is he's just not getting super involved as a pass catcher. Only 5 receptions in his last 5 total games. So I still think he's in this back-end RB1 range. But if you would have told me the usage he's had all season and how healthy he's been, I definitely would have thought he'd be more locked into this top 10. Potential Tier 1 option, but we're just not there at this point. Then I have Chuba Hubbard going up against the Cardinals. Hasn't been great in his last 3 games, under 9 PPR points in 2 of them, but he still had a fairly high ceiling, 20 plus PPR points in 3 of his last 6. Could see a bounce back here from this Panthers offense after a pretty rough week 15. Then I have Rico Dowdle going up against the Buccaneers. In his last 4 games, he has rushed for 86, 112, 131, and 149 rushing yards. He just continues to build on these performances. I'm not super scared of this Buccaneers matchup. Cowboys offense has looked better than expected. I think Rico Dowdle at this point is a really nice play. Then I'm going to go with Joe Mixon going up against the Chiefs. And this might seem really low for someone who is the running back 2 in points per game, but he's kind of struggled as of late, under 2 yards per carry in 2 of his last 3 games. And this is just a really, really tough matchup here against the Chiefs. They're allowing the fewest points per game to the running back position. They've been a nightmare matchup. So the fact that, this Texans offensive line is struggling, Mixon's efficiency hasn't been there, plus this is just a really tough spot against the Chiefs, I do have him all the way down here as my running back 14. Now, maybe he gets into the end zone a couple of times and that kind of saves him. Definitely possible, but it's tough for me to be overly excited about Joe Mixon this week just with the matchup. And then 2 more guys in this tier. I have Bucky Irving going up against the Cowboys. Obviously, he had some concerns heading into this game just based on his back injury, left week 14 early. Would he have a similar situation? Ends up playing the full game. Similar usage to what he normally gets, 15 carries for 117 yards. This Cowboys defense is allowing the 6th most points per game to the running back position. And as long as Bucky Irving is healthy, he's been a super fun play this season. I think he's a nice option. And then my last guy in this tier, Isaac Guerendo going up against the Dolphins. In his 2 games as the starter, he has 17 and 20 opportunities. Didn't have the best game in week 15, but it was really just due to the 49ers offense struggling. I think he can have a nice bounce back here in week 16. Now moving into a smaller tier 4, going to start off with Jonathan Taylor going up against the Titans. And if you have rostered Jonathan Taylor, this has been a very frustrating season, and it probably reached a peak in week 15. He's getting solid usage on the ground, had a really efficient day, but he just straight up drops a touchdown. He has the ball and he drops it a few inches before he gets into the end zone. Just absolutely brutal. He's still getting nice usage, 20 plus carries in 4 of his last 5, but the overall, fantasy production just has not been there. So I think he's in this mid-tier RB2 area. Then I have Aaron Jones going up against the Seahawks. Kind of had a rough middle of the season, starting to right the ship here, 16 plus points in 3 of his last 4. Still not going to be the full-on workhorse, probably doesn't have the craziest ceiling. You have Cam Akers working in there, but still a nice RB2 play. Then I have Rachaad White going up against the Cowboys. In week 15, he had 17 opportunities, the exact same number as Bucky Irving. He scored 11 or more points in 7 of his last 8. And like I talked about with Bucky, on paper, this is a good matchup here against the Cowboys. And then my last guy in this tier, Breece Hall going up against the Rams. Still not really sure what the Jets are doing here because Breece Hall is clearly not 100%. He played under 50% of the snaps, had under a 50% route participation. I don't understand why you're playing a not 100% Breece Hall when you're completely out of the playoff picture. It doesn't make much sense to me, but fantasy-wise, he had 11 opportunities. He got into the end zone. You'd assume that he'd be healthier heading into the next one, so maybe he's more at that 55 to 60% snaps, 55 to 60% route participation. That's the hope. As of right now, I have him as my running back 20, but could reevaluate as we get more information throughout the week. Now looking at tier 5, going to start off with Brian Robinson going up against the Eagles. This is kind of like the tier of guys where you feel like they could be better, but they're just not necessarily coming through consistently. So for Brian Robinson here, terrible matchup. The Eagles are allowing the 2nd fewest points per game to the running back position, but he's handling a solid workload week after week, 16 or more carries in 4 of his last 5 games. Another guy who's had really solid usage, Tony Pollard going up against the Colts. The Colts are averaging the 8th most points per game allowed to the running back position. Tony Pollard has had 14 or more opportunities in 4 straight games. But you also have Tajay Spears kind of working his way into this backfield. Had a really nice day through the air in week 15, so I would not be shocked to see Tajay Spears take more opportunities. Also had a goal line touchdown, which was probably super frustrating for Tony Pollard owners. I think at this point, back-end RB2 range. On paper, it's a good matchup. If he had some of the usage he had when Tajay Spears was out, I'd be much higher on him, but Tajay Spears definitely becoming a nuisance in this backfield. My running back 23 is going to be Jerome Ford going up against the Bengals. Nick Chubb, done for the season. Dude just can't catch a break with injuries. But we saw in this game, even though Pierre Strong didn't get a ton of run, ton of snaps, routes, whatever, Jerome Ford still led with 7 opportunities to Pierre Strong 0. Not crazy to think that Jerome Ford has a pretty solid workload with no Nick Chubb in the lineup. And then my last guy in this tier, Ramondre Stevenson, going up against the Bills. Bills are allowing the second most points per game to the running back position, but Ramondre Stevenson has been on a cold stretch here, under 13 PPR points in each of his last 5 games, in somewhat of a split with Antonio Gibson, but this is just not a good offense. They are not putting up points. Ramondre's fantasy production hasn't been great, so I don't know how much he's going to be able to capitalize on this favorable matchup. And then moving into tier 6, pretty much lead backs in very, very gross situations. Actually going to start off with Kendre Miller going up against the Packers. This is obviously assuming that Alvin Kamara is out with that groin injury. We saw he out-touched Jamal Williams 10-0 in that game. Reason to believe he's stepping into a pretty solid workload, and kind of a real shakeup here for Kendre Miller, because with Dennis Allen as the head coach, I mean, this dude seemed like he just hated Kendre Miller's guts for whatever reason. The dude would never say anything nice about him. Kendre Miller now, with a new head coach, interim head coach taking over, they seem to like him a lot more. Now he'll probably get an opportunity to be the running back 1 if Alvin Kamara does miss some time. After Miller, going to go with DeAndre Swift going up against the Lions. He has scored under 10 PPR points in each of his last 4 games. Should have gotten into the end zone in week 15. Offensive lineman does not come in, does not declare himself as eligible. And then, so that gets called back. Then they have a hold on his next goal line carry. It was unfortunate. If you do roster DeAndre Swift, it has been rough. I do think, even though on paper it's not a great matchup here against the Lions, I do think it's a little bit of a softer matchup just with the injuries they've had on the defensive side, but still tough to be fully confident in DeAndre Swift at this point. Then I have Najee Harris going up against the Ravens. It's not a good matchup. They are bottom 8 in points per game allowed. Also, probably not a great game script for Najee. They're 6.5-point dogs. In week 15, he is coming off his worst game of the season, only 3.1 PPR points. He has had pretty consistent usage, typically handles a solid workload on the ground. Didn't really see that last week, and I'm not sure we're going to get that here against the Ravens. Then I have Isaiah Pacheco as my running back 28 going up against the Texans. This was not a great week for Pacheco. Didn't do much fantasy-wise, but also the usage was not ideal. In week 14, it looked like he was starting to pull away from Kareem Hunt. Week 15, they just went right back to a 50-50 split, like pretty much as close of a 50-50 split as you can get. That's not great, especially in a matchup where the Texans are allowing the 4th fewest points per game. So definitely not ideal for Pacheco. 2 more guys here, Travis Etienne going up against the Raiders. Really tough to trust this Jaguars backfield. If I wanted to make another tier, I could probably do it with Etienne and Tracy. But Etienne led in opportunities 18-12. That was after Tank kind of blew him away in touches the previous week. So who knows if this sticks. He had a fine fantasy day. You're just hoping he kind of replicates it. And then I have Tyrone Tracy, my running back 30. Potentially the biggest loser from this past week. Went from like dominant workhorse usage in week 14 to only out-touching Devin Singletary by 3 in week 15, including Singletary coming in and taking a goal line touchdown. So the usage looked amazing. Then it just all fell apart here for Tyrone Tracy. So he's going to close it out here as my running back 30. That's going to wrap it up for these rankings. Any questions, feel free to drop them down below. If you guys enjoyed, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and subscribe. Check out the wide receivers if you haven't seen them, but thank you all again, and I will see you in the next one.